现在订阅同盟会英语，不论找工作、升学或英检，表现更棒。快上 StudioClassroom.com， 现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. An injured woman learns to move again. Today on Advanced. Hello and welcome to Advanced Radio. We are so excited to have you joining us again for today's program. Today is May 6th. It's the first day of our inspiration article, and it's going to be a really great story that we get into today. I am your host, David, today, and I have two wonderful guests here joining me. Could you please introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Pauline. Always happy to be in the studio, especially with smooth voice Dave here. Doesn't he sound like he should be on like a late night jazz show? It just makes you feel calm. And anyways, it is a joy to be here. Excited to talk with all you guys today.
Great, and my name is Hazel, and thanks, students, for joining us today. We do have a moving article.
We certainly do.
Moving article.
Hazel.
That's the title, A Moving Story.
A moving story. Hazel, actually, could you break down a little bit what that means, if you have a moving story?
Well, we know what move means. It means maybe to change locations, to go from point A to point B. But when something is moving or it moves you, it inspires you, or it makes you cry, or it makes you emotional. Mm-hmm. So if something is moving, so this is a play on words. It's a moving story. It's a story about a lady who, at some point, thinks she might have trouble moving like she used to, but we're going to find out that her challenge, she conquers her challenge, and so it is a moving story of inspiration.
Right, yeah. So moving in this case means something that has some emotional content, right? It can move you. Sometimes we talk about something moving you to tears, right? Makes you feel like you want to cry.
Which that's maybe where you can really understand where it comes from with the literal definition of movement, because the idea is it changes your position, but it's your emotional position, right? Maybe you start at a neutral, and then you see this thing and all of a sudden you change. Your emotions move to a different place where you're so touched that you might cry, or you're in a different emotional state as a result of this thing.
And usually when we talk about something being emotionally moving in that way, we're usually talking about something making you sad, right? I don't usually hear moves to anger as often.
As often, right? I guess it could happen. But also, to me, it's always, even though it frequently does include tears, it's usually like touching. Like we don't think of it as just straight like tragic. If something's just like really depressing or really just hopeless, we wouldn't say, oh, I was really moved. You would just be like, oh, that was so sad. Moving usually includes an idea of something inspiring or encouraging within it.
Yeah. And so, speaking of things being moving, right, and kind of having those that kind of emotional relationship, I had a question for us at the beginning of the program here. We're going to get into a story about a woman who overcame a big loss in her life. And I would just like to ask you guys, have you ever had an experience where you lost something or someone that really made a big change in your life, really forced you to change something about your life?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is when I was in college over Christmas break. I was home with my family and our house burned down.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah. So we were outside. Our house was basically completely destroyed, at least from the inside. And we weren't able to live in our house for the next year. It had to be completely restored. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously that was a really big loss. I remember the day after just walking around my town being like, I don't have a home.
So you had to move, and that was moving.
Yeah. I will say what was moving about that was the way the community really cared for us, especially our church community. Within a day, we did have a place that we were living. I mean, and it was furnished, and we had clothes. I mean, the way that church community just came around us and gave us everything we need and was there for, that could almost move me to tears just talking about it. And that was one of the most positive things that came out of that, is really that in a very real, tangible way, experiencing what, as a Christian, we talk about the body of Christ, or we talk about the church being this thing that's supposed to be really all about loving one another. And it felt like that was really true in that time. That
is amazing. Wow. What a wonderful story. What a blessing to have that family come alongside you guys in that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. How about you, Hazel?
Well, nothing quite as dramatic, but if you like animals and you lose a dog, I had a dog here that ran away, and I think it was Chinese New Year, and I think maybe she heard the fireworks, and so she was always would come when you called her, but this night she didn't come, and I was so sad. So I kept getting up at night and looking for her, and I never found out what happened to her. So for the next few months, the next few years, if I saw a dog that looked similar, it's like, oh, maybe that's her, so it's just hard when you lose something, and sometimes you know what happened to it or you find it, and sometimes you don't. But this story is even more dramatic because she lost something that's so irreplaceable and such a part of her, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only imagine losing your dog is even harder because you never found any confirmation of what had happened.
You have no clue if she's okay or if she's. It helps if you know what the end of the story is. You just want the dog to be treated right and have a good home.
Yeah. Yeah, so on a slightly less emotional...
Lessy?
On a slightly lessy emotional... On a slightly less emotional
Friends, that's not a word, not lessy.
Yeah, not lessy. Not a word. Don't write it down. I was kind of thinking about this question, and there's there's different answers I could give, but one that kind of came to mind was when I lived in Philadelphia while I was in college, I lost multiple bikes.
Wow, multiple.
Multiple bikes got stolen.
Oh.
Multiple bikes. And I almost felt like by the end of my time in Philadelphia, I kind of felt like, like the city should sort of gift me a bike because I've contributed so much, to the bike economy, if you please. Yeah, I had one nice one get stolen right out in front of one of the buildings on my university. But I had one of those little thin wire locks. Like the real thin ones that you just sort of wrap around your wheel and the frame or whatever. And you could basically cut those with a sturdy pair of scissors, and I guess someone did because...
Somebody figured that out, huh?
Yeah. And I think that was the weirdest one because with that one, the bike was gone, but the lock was still there. Actually, the lock wasn't even cut with that. Yeah, and I still haven't figured that out. And then I lost another one. It was out in front of someone's house when I was at a party, and then I lost another one. And it was just this hilarious chain of bikes that got stolen, And each time, certainly changed my life because for a while I would just have to walk everywhere or take public transportation. And Philadelphia is not Taipei, people. There's not, we do have a subway system, but it's dirty, it's slow, it doesn't go as many places, it smells, like urine most of the time. Urine, that's the smell that might hit you when you walk into a public bathroom in the summertime. That's sort of the way that the subway stations would smell sometimes when you go down there. So just if you're coming from living in Taipei and using these very clean, efficient, MRT systems, think more or less the opposite of that. And then you have Philadelphia.
You're not giving a very good good name to our your state, to your home state.
It's a wonderful city. It's a wonderful city. It's just the public transportation was not necessarily wonderful.
Okay, that's all I wanted to hear. There has to be some good there.
Right. Yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
It's a very historic city.
It's a very historic city, and you can get really good food there. They got cheesesteaks. If you ever get a cheesesteak in Philadelphia, go to Tony Luke's in South Philadelphia. That's where you got to go. There's always going to be a line out the door because they're good.
That's how you know it's good, right?
That's how you know it's good, especially you people of Taipei. That's how you know it's good. If there's a line. Anyway, so we are going to get into our story for now and find out more about this moving story of Jen Andrews. We're going to be starting off with our reading is going to be from the left-hand side over to the top of the right hand. Our deck is Giving New Limbs to Others Has Helped Her Feel Whole Again, which is a really beautiful way to start off this article. Someone who is giving out of an experience of suffering. So let's learn more about it. Let's check it out.
The moving story of Jen Andrews. Giving new limbs to others has helped her feel whole again. There was a time, not too long ago in fact, when the mere thought of an amputee or a prosthetic limb would sink Jen Andrews into a depression that might take days to dig herself out of. But she knew allowing a surgeon to eliminate a key part of her body was the strongest possible stance she could take against the rare form of sarcoma that was trying to take her life. So on March 12, 2018, she woke up in a recovery room at the hospital, lighter by one right foot, but also surprisingly with a weight removed from her shoulders. In the nearly 26 months since her right foot was taken away, the 35-year-old mother of 2 young children is long over grieving her loss, long past feeling sorry for herself. In fact, today a big chunk of her life is devoted to amputees and to bringing them together through the organization that she and her husband Miles established in 2018.
All right, now this story begins with sort of talking about a change that has come over this woman named Jen Andrews. It says that there was a time not too long ago, in fact, when the mere thought of an amputee or a prosthetic limb would sink Jen Andrews into a depression that would take days to dig herself out of. So what are they talking about when they talk about a prosthetic limb?
Well, for one, just to say, I will be saying during our conversation on the radio here, I'm going to be saying prosthetic, although you'll hear when I do the reading for this, I say prosthetic. There are a couple different ways to pronounce this, and I actually really struggled to say it the other way with the TH sound, just because that's not the way I normally do. But I thought, I should tell you guys that, because you should know, even as a native speaker, sometimes we come across a word we really struggle with, and we really have to practice, multiple times before it comes out right. Anyways, prosthetics are I believe it always refers to a limb that is not an actual limb that is, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a fake limb or a man-made limb to replace one that is lost by a person.
Yeah.
Or an animal, I guess, too.
Or an animal, too, right. And I actually, I think we often use it to describe a limb. When I looked it up, I saw that it's basically, it could replace any body part.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, prosthetic could be. So there are people that have prosthetics on, even like parts of their mouth. They could have, that could also be called a prosthetic. So it's basically a device that replaces a missing body part, but generally we use it to refer to a limb.
I suppose those are the most common prosthetics, right?
Yeah, the most common prosthetics would be referring to a limb. Now, we know that it's a limb in this case because she's talking about being an amputee, which, Hazel, what's an amputee?
Well, that's someone that has a part of their body removed, usually from surgery, I guess, or maybe a limb is cut off and then that's, they need to cut further up or something. But I think, too, an amputee, a limb I think of as a whole arm or a whole leg, but an amputee can be a hand or a foot, as in Jen's case, we're going to find out. So just part of your body that often we think of legs, right? If you just said there was an amputee, you would get the idea that their leg was missing or part of their leg was missing.
But I do think with amputees, usually I think with that one we see in the definition that it's only arms and legs, I guess, which makes sense. I don't know what else you can actually... I mean, you wouldn't say if somebody had their ear cut off if there was an accident that they were an amputee.
Maybe
right?
an ear-putee. No, that's not a word.
But like Hazel said, that's right. It doesn't mean their entire arm or their entire leg, at least a part of it, has been cut off either intentionally through surgery or there was an accident and then, they survived it, and so you would still call them an amputee.
Right. Like I'm missing part of my finger on my left hand. But that doesn't make me an amputee. It just means that I'm missing part of my finger.
That's right. But maybe you could get a finger prosthetic.
I could get a finger prosthetic. I could.
I don't think so. I don't know if that exists.
We'll think, they got everything now.
So an amputee is someone that has had something amputated.
Right.
All right, taken off.
Exactly. And so this is something, but the thought of losing a limb is something that would have really made Jen Andrews in the past fall into a deep depression, right? That she would not be able to dig herself out of. Sometimes when we talk about depression, it's like being in a hole.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some nice imagery there, and good job on the author for pairing that imagery, but it is something that we do a lot in English often. Actually, we talk about depression, like you said, as a whole, as something we picture it as something that you fall into, that you go down. We talk about emotions as, if you're having kind of a down day or something's a downer, that all refers to negative emotions. We think of negative feelings and emotions as something that's down, and then we use the imagery of going up as something that is happier or getting better. So we have this very physical picture here of falling into a depression, going deep down into a very deep level of extended unhappiness and difficulty, and then having to really struggle to move back out of that.
Right. And so even though that's something that she was really struggling with, she knew that was the strongest stance that she could take against the rare disease that was afflicting her. What was that disease, Hazel?
A sarcoma, which is a cancer, a tumor that comes from the bone or from some soft tissue in your body, maybe a muscle, fat or blood vessels. And so she had this cancerous, malignant tumor, and so she had to take a stance. What was she going to do about it? And so that's imagery too. We're going to find out it's in her foot, and she needs to take a stand. So those two, that imagery kind of fits together. This is not a humorous article, but sometimes it's okay to use that imagery, even in an article that's a little more serious.
Right, right. And taking a stance here also means she's going to not give in to it, right?
Right.
She's going to,
We can kind of think of it as like a fighting stance sometimes we talk about.
Yeah.
So she's going to take the strongest stance. She's going to fight against this. And so the best way to fight it is by, unfortunately, having to go through this amputee, or go through an amputation.
Right, go through an amputation.
Yeah.
And so she decides to go through with it, and then she wakes up, the article kind of moves on to kind of after the surgery, and she wakes up in a recovery room at the hospital. And I thought this was a very interesting way to put this, because she is lighter by one right foot, but also surprisingly with a weight removed from her shoulders. Does that mean that they chopped off a shoulder also?
No, but I do like the way this author writes. It just does a lot of play on words, and it just is a very well-written article here. So instead of just saying she woke up without a foot, she just says lighter by one foot, which is kind of nice. It's almost like a euphemism we talk about with when we have things that are difficult. Sometimes we try and find ways to talk about them that don't sound as harsh or strong. Instead of saying she woke up with her foot cut off, that would be like, oh. Instead it's lighter by one foot. That already kind of sounds nicer, but we get the idea. I mean, it's still serious. We all know she doesn't have it. But then also sometimes we talk about, Again, it kind of goes along with that. We were talking about if you are unhappy, we talk about this imagery of downward feelings going down.
Right. Like
and
you're in a hole.
Yeah. And that when we talk about happy emotions, we talk about a lightness moving up, so we're not being pushed down by this sense of anxiety or depression. And in her case, and so we'll talk about having a weight removed from your shoulder. It means, you're not fighting these negative emotions. All of a sudden you're just lifted up and you're feeling happy again. And so that's kind of the imagery here, is that, to her surprise, having the foot taken off also lifted all of this maybe fear and anxiety that she'd been living in for a long time about this moment. But now it's here, and it wasn't as bad as she thought.
Right. And furthermore, she's no longer dying of sarcoma. That's certainly a weight to be lifted off your shoulders.
Yeah, for sure.
But what's really amazing about this woman is that after having her right foot taken away, this 35-year-old mother of 2 young children, which is like another amazing thing, right? She was battling this illness, and then she had to do the surgery, and she also has 2 young children. We don't know how young, but probably young enough that they're still in grade school. She's taking care of these children, right? But she's no longer grieving her loss. She's not in a pit like she thought that she would be. Instead, she is devoting her life to amputees. And how is she, it says a little bit about that there, Hazel. Could you go into that for us?
Well, her and her husband started an organization just a number of years ago, just in 2018. And what they tried to do is help other amputees, not just to have a prosthetic that enables them to walk, but to do something active, to exercise perhaps the way they're used to. So we know that different prosthetics are designed for different things. So some might just be very functional, but some are designed for running and for other sports that you might enjoy. So things are changing. It's not just enough now to be able to do basic things, but thanks to science and thanks to ingenuity, new inventions and new improvements in prosthetics are coming along.
Yeah, and we're going to learn more about that, actually. Let's go ahead and finish the rest of this article, and then we'll talk about the foundation, some of the challenges facing people who are trying to get the right parts for their body, and kind of, and just get into a little bit more about how she provides mobility to people that have suffered the way she has. Let's check it out.
The foundation. Today, Andrews gets to surprise fellow sarcoma survivors with new activewear prostheses, courtesy of a Move for Jen Foundation grant. This whole experience has changed me so much to the core, Andrews says. I'm not the same person that I was, and with each grant we give, it just heals me emotionally. Nothing can make me feel the way that I feel when I give somebody back their mobility, so I just want to do it over and over and over. Move to action. To a certain degree, the Move for Jen Foundation was born out of frustration. Andrew's frustration with a health insurance system that helps amputees to obtain a prosthesis only for walking. Above and beyond that, the money for what's often called an activewear prosthesis will have to come out of a patient's own pocket. The going rate? It varies, but a running blade and a custom-fitted socket paired together starts in the $5,000 to $10,000 range.
All right. Now, I really do love the way that this story kind of picks up into getting into a bit of the nitty-gritty of how the foundation works. Now, this I love. Andrews, she gets to surprise fellow sarcoma survivors with new activewear prostheses, courtesy of a Move for Jen Foundation grant. Now, just quickly, a grant means it's a gift of money that does not need to be repaid. The grants are usually given by large organizations, by governments, by organizations, and it's different from a loan, which is something that has to be paid back. A grant is a usually large gift of money for something specifically that does not need to be paid back. But also there's this word up here, activewear. What are they talking about when they say activewear?
Well, usually if we were just to use the word activewear, you'd think of clothing that you wear that's specifically for working out, lightweight, or maybe like tennis shoes and other gear that we use to do exercise in different sports. But here it's paired with prostheses, so we know that it's a prosthesis that's supposed to be used in active exercise kind of situations.
Yeah. And how has this experience changed Jen Andrews, Hazel?
Well, it's changed her to the core. And so the core means the very center of her life. Okay. So it's really changed her a lot. She's not the same person that she was. Because now that she had this grant, she could find activewear prostheses for other people, and it gives them joy, and it gives her joy realizing that she's helping others.
Yeah, and it's beautiful the way she says that she's able to give someone back their mobility, right? And this is this is something that happened for her, and it gives her joy. It's part of her recovery in a lot of ways, to be able to do that for others again and again. Now, here we're talking about being moved to action, but Pauline.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, but I think the question that comes to mind is, why is this grant necessary? Why does she need to give these and do this? And that's what we see in this next part. We hear about what moved her to action, what motivated her to do this, and what motivated her was actually frustration. And that's kind of this overwhelming theme in this story about how you have these negative experiences or negative emotions that then turn into something better, right? So frustration we don't usually think of as like a positive emotion, something we want to experience in our life. But it was her frustration of realizing how difficult the American health system is, health insurance system is, especially in providing amputees with what they need to really get back fully into society, fully active, and realizing that she couldn't get all those things. She could get a walking prosthesis, and of course, you want to be able to walk. I mean, that's the very most basic. You want to be able to move again. But for people who have spent their whole life being extremely active, doing sports, and you would think with kids wanting to run around the yard playing with your children, that can still feel like there's this huge gap from what you had before, where you're at now, what you want. And there are now, as Hazel said, advances in technology that you can have that if you have this activewear prosthesis.
Right. And the thing is, before they did not have those kinds of resources available. Now they do, right? But if you want that kind of prosthesis, then the extra cost has to come out of your own pocket. And Hazel, what's the going rate for an activewear for one of these special prostheses?
The range is about $5,000 to $10,000 US. So that's quite a bit of pocket money.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's really insane. And going rate here is just referring to the typical price that something would be, right? So that means, if you want to get anything from like a basic, running blade is what they're referred to something more advanced, it's going to be $5,000 to $10,000. So that is kind of gives you a picture of just how happy these people must be to receive these gifts from the Move for Jen Foundation. We're actually going to go on to learn more about the way that she provides these gifts, the people that have received them, and the kinds of events that she uses to raise money for them. But that's all the time we have to talk about it for today. Please do come back tomorrow, May 7th, to see just some other elements of how the Move for Jen Foundation is changing lives. But until then, I'm David.
Hazel.
And this is Pauline.
And we're saying goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.